The Battle of Bosworth, fought on the 22nd of August 1485, is often heralded as a defining moment in English history. As the culminating conflict of the Wars of the Roses, it ended decades of fighting between the houses of Lancaster and York. This battle not only marked the fall of the Plantagenet dynasty, but also started the rise of the Tudors, fundamentally altering the course of English history. This video explores the intricate political maneuvers, the key players, and the dramatic battlefield events that made the Battle of Bosworth such an important moment in the history of England. I'll explore why the Wars of the Roses came to a head at Bosworth, as well as what political and social dynamics drove the decades-long conflict between the houses of Lancaster and York, and how did these shape the conditions leading to the final confrontation. I'll look into the root causes of the Wars of the Roses, examining the fragile nature of medieval kingship and the personal ambitions that fueled the rivalry. I'll also look at how Henry Tudor, a relatively obscure claimant in exile, rose to challenge the might of the Yorkist king. What alliances and strategies did Henry employ to build his support base, and what role did foreign assistance play in his campaign? We will trace Henry's journey from exile to his return to England. I'll also look at the controversial figure and the last Plantagenet king, Richard III. Was he a tyrant whose actions alienated his supporters, or a capable ruler beset by insurmountable challenges? What decisions led to his downfall, and how did his leadership influence the outcome of the battle? I'll also explore the Battle of Bosworth itself and the strategies and tactics that determined the course of the conflict. Plus, I'll look at how the geography of the battlefield and the makeup of the opposing forces influenced the outcome. The aftermath of Bosworth ushered in the Tudor dynasty, but what immediate and long-term impacts did this have on England? How did Henry consolidate his power and secure the throne, and what changes did he implement to stabilize his new kingdom? I'll explore the political, social, and economic reforms initiated by Henry and their lasting legacy on England. So join me as I look at how the Battle of Bosworth marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The Wars of the Roses were a series of conflicts that gripped England during the 15th century, embroiling the nation in a period of political and social turmoil. These wars were primarily fought between two rival branches of the Plantagenet family, the House of Lancaster, represented by a red rose, and the House of York, symbolized by a white one. Both houses laid claim to the English throne, leading to a bitter struggle for dominance. The origins of the conflict can be traced to the ineffectual rule of Henry VI, a Lancastrian king who ascended to the throne as an infant following the death of his father, Henry V, in 1422. Henry VI's reign was marked by periods of mental illness and weak leadership, which exacerbated existing tensions among the nobility and led to a decline in royal authority. His incapacity to govern effectively created a power vacuum and fostered widespread discontent. Amid this backdrop of instability, Richard, Duke of York, emerged as a powerful and ambitious figure. A descendant of Edward III, Richard had a strong hereditary claim to the throne, which he asserted with growing determination as Henry VI's rule faltered. Initially, Richard sought to reform the government and curb the influence of Henry's unpopular advisors, but as conflicts escalated, his ambitions turned towards seizing the crown for himself. The initial skirmish of the Wars of the Roses occurred in 1455 at the First Battle of St. Albans, where Richard's forces triumphed, setting off a cycle of conflict that would continue for 3 decades. The throne exchanged hands several times between the Lancastrians and Yorkists, with notable battles such as Towton in 1461 and Tewkesbury, which I've already covered in a previous video, marking the ongoing struggle. During these tumultuous years, the country was plunged into chaos, with numerous nobles switching allegiances and vying for power. The death toll among the aristocracy was significant, and the constant warfare devastated large swathes of England. The complex web of loyalties and hostilities was further complicated by internal family dynamics and external influences, including support from France and Burgundy. In 1461, Edward IV, the son of Richard, Duke of York, captured the throne for the Yorkists after defeating the Lancastrian forces. His reign, however, was intermittently disrupted by renewed Lancastrian uprisings and internal dissension within the Yorkist faction. Edward IV's death in 1483 led to the brief and controversial reign of his brother, Richard III. Richard's ascension to the throne was marred by the mysterious disappearance and presumed murder of his nephews, the princes in the Tower, which undermined his legitimacy and fueled opposition. By 1485, discontent with Richard's rule had played into the hands of Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian claimant with a distant but legitimate claim through his mother, Margaret Beaufort, a descendant of Edward III. Richard was born on October 2, 1452. He was the 12th child of Richard Plantagenet, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville. He ascended the throne in 1483 under highly contentious circumstances following the death of his brother King Edward IV. Upon Edward's death, Richard was named Lord Protector for Edward's young son and heir, Edward V. However, the young king and his brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York, soon disappeared while lodged in the Tower of London. These events led to widespread speculation and accusations of foul play, with many suspecting Richard of orchestrating their disappearance and possible murder to usurp the throne. This incident, known as the Mystery of the Princes in the Tower, cast a long shadow over his reign and has remained one of history's enduring mysteries, with all the evidence only being circumstantial. Richard's claim to the throne was facilitated by claims that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid, rendering his children illegitimate. This provided a pretext for Richard's claim, but it was met with skepticism and outrage, especially from those loyal to the young princes and their mother. As a result, Richard faced immediate and widespread distrust, with his legitimacy as king being continually questioned. Richard III's rule was characterized by attempts to solidify his power and legitimacy. He implemented several legal reforms, including measures aimed at improving the judicial system and protecting individual liberties. Despite these efforts, his heavy-handed approach to governance, coupled with the lingering doubts about his role in the disappearance of his nephews, fueled ongoing opposition. One of these opponents was Henry Tudor, whose ascent to power was a tale of survival and resilience, marked by a series of strategic maneuvers and alliances. Born on the 28th of January 1457 to Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond, and Margaret Beaufort, Henry's claim to the English throne was tenuous but legitimate through his mother. Margaret Beaufort was a descendant of John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, who was a son of Edward III, thereby providing Henry with a Lancastrian claim to the throne. The early years of Henry's life were fraught with danger. His father, Edmund Tudor, died 3 months before his birth, leaving Margaret a young widow. The Wars of the Roses engulfed England during Henry's childhood, and in 1471, the Lancastrians suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Tewkesbury, where many of Henry's Lancastrian relatives were killed or captured. Fearing for his safety under the Yorkist rule of Edward IV, Henry fled to Brittany, a duchy in present-day France, which was known for its independence and relative safety from English influence. While in Brittany, Henry lived under the protection of Duke Francis II. This period of exile, which lasted for 14 years, was critical for Henry's development and survival. He cultivated connections with other Lancastrian exiles and disaffected Yorkists, who became dissatisfied with Richard III's rise to power. His mother also played a crucial role during this time, tirelessly working to promote her son's cause and secure support for his claim to the throne. By 1485, the political landscape in England was ripe for change. Richard's reign had become increasingly unpopular due to his usurpation of the throne from his nephew, Edward V, and the mysterious disappearance of the young princes in the Tower. Henry capitalized on this discontent with the backing of the French government. This provided him with financial and military aid, and with the crucial support of disaffected Yorkist nobles, such as the influential Stanley family, Henry launched his campaign to claim the English throne. Henry's return to England was meticulously planned. He landed at Mill Bay in Pembrokeshire on the 7th of August 1485 and began his march through Wales, gathering support as he went. The Battle of Bosworth took place near Market Bosworth in Leicestershire. Richard's forces were estimated to be around 10 to 15,000 men and was supported by key allies such as the Duke of Norfolk and the Earl of Northumberland. The Lancastrian forces, led by Henry, were significantly smaller, estimated at around 5 to 8,000 men, with his key allies including John de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, and Sir William Stanley. Richard III positioned his forces on Ambion Hill south of Market Bosworth, providing a strong defensive stance with a clear view of the surrounding area, whilst Henry's forces approached from the southwest. The battle commenced with an engagement pattern that was common at the time. Richard's forces held the high ground, while Henry's troops advanced cautiously. The Earl of Oxford, commanding Henry's vanguard, led a disciplined advance to engage the Yorkist forces. Richard's strategy relied on his superior numbers and the advantageous position on Ambion Hill. Norfolk's forces engaged in a frontal assault against the advancing Lancastrians, while Northumberland, positioned in the rear, remained inactive. It is suspected that he did this as an act of treason in favour of Henry Tudor. Meanwhile, on the Lancastrian side, Oxford utilised a tight formation to counter the numerical disadvantage, focusing on disciplined infantry manoeuvres. Henry remained towards the rear, protected by his personal guard, while observing the battle's progress. The crucial turning point came with the intervention of Sir William Stanley. Initially neutral, Stanley's forces decisively entered the battle on Henry's side. This unexpected move had a significant psychological and tactical impact. The fresh troops provided a necessary boost to the Lancastrian side and struck a critical blow to the morale and organisation of Richard's army. In a bold, albeit desperate move, Richard III launched a personal charge directly at Henry, aiming to end the battle swiftly by killing the Lancastrian leader. This act of valour brought Richard within striking distance of Henry, but ultimately resulted in Richard's death. His horse was killed, and he fought valiantly until he was overwhelmed and slain in the fighting, suffering several blows to the head. With Richard dead, the Yorkist forces rapidly disintegrated. Leaderless and demoralised, many fled or surrendered. The battle concluded with a decisive victory for Henry Tudor, who was crowned King Henry VII on the battlefield. Estimates suggest that the Yorkists suffered several hundred to a few thousand casualties, including key nobles. Lancastrian losses were comparatively lighter, though still significant. In 2012, the remains of Richard III were discovered beneath a car park in Leicester. His skeleton was excavated by the University of Leicester Archaeological Services. The remains, identified through DNA analysis, were found in what was once the site of Greyfriars, a medieval friary. The skeleton showed signs of severe injuries consistent with accounts of Richard's death at the Battle of Bosworth and his posthumous mistreatment. This finding not only provides closure to a historical mystery, but also sparked renewed interest in Richard's life and reign. The death of Richard and the victory of Henry Tudor at Bosworth Field marked the end of the Wars of the Roses and the beginning of the Tudor dynasty. Henry VII's victory not only ended decades of dynastic strife, but also paved the way for significant political and social changes that would shape the course of English history. The Tudor dynasty would rule England for over a century, and through his marriage to the eldest daughter of Edward IV, Elizabeth of York, Henry strategically united the rival houses of Lancaster and York, symbolically ending the bitter feud that had divided the realm. This union not only solidified Henry's claim to the throne, but also brought a sense of reconciliation and unity to a fractured nation. Henry's reign was characterized by a concerted effort to consolidate royal authority and strengthen the monarchy. Implementing reforms aimed at centralizing power, Henry curtailed the influence of the nobility and established mechanisms, such as the Court of Star Chamber, to assert control over his subjects. His prudent fiscal policies and astute financial management bolstered the crown's coffers, laying the foundation for a more powerful and economically stable monarchy. The Tudor period witnessed a transformation of English society and governance. Economic growth, fueled by trade and commerce, fostered the rise of a burgeoning middle class and contributed to a more prosperous nation. Meanwhile, administrative reforms and bureaucratic centralization led to a more efficient system of governance, enhancing the Crown's ability to govern effectively and maintain order. In retrospect, The aftermath of the Battle of Bosworth marked a turning point in English history, ushering in an era of relative stability, prosperity, and transformation under the Tudor monarchs. Henry VII's reign laid the groundwork for the enduring legacy of the Tudor dynasty, shaping the trajectory of English governance and society for generations to come. If you enjoyed this video, then give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be notified of our next video. Join us next time, where we'll be diving into more fascinating events from history.